Hello, I am Shazza and this is Hooked on Books. Hi. So, it's no secret that I'm quite an eclectic reader, and I thought it'd be interesting to look back at some of the books that I have read this month or this year and to see if there's any particular areas in which I've kind of neglected. Because I read quite a lot, it's always kind of helpful for me to be able to identify if I've missed something. Is there a genre that I'm suddenly like, why haven't I read anything? So I thought I'd just go through some of the stuff that I've read. First up, we've got this one, which is Dreams Must Explain Themselves, the selected non-fiction of Ursula K. Guin. So I read this as part of the BookTube rereadathon, and last month I reread The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Guin as well, so I thought it would be interesting to transition into some of her non-fiction as well. Honestly, when I was reading this, I didn't actually remember any of these, so it kind of just felt like reading it for the first time. Which is the first experience I've had that since taking part in the BookTube rereadathon. Having read this and The Left Hand of Darkness recently, I have discovered that Ursula K. Guin is a writer that I like to study rather than being a writer that I just like to read. So I didn't necessarily love either of them this time round, to be honest. But there's still a lot in here that I think that was very interesting. She looks a lot at gender, she also does that in terms of looking at her own novels. She looks a lot at science fiction as a genre and the snobbery that exists around science fiction and fantasy. You know, if someone is reading a massive fantasy novel against someone who's reading War and Peace, the person that's reading War and Peace, that's kind of looked at as it's more respected, basically. So I found that interesting to kind of see her arguments against why that's wrong. She looks at the difference between American attitudes and British attitudes towards science fiction and fantasy. There's just a lot in here. She talks about the left hand of darkness within this. She says, I eliminated gender to find out what was left. Whatever was left would be, presumably, simply human. It would define the area that is shared by men and women alike. Which is exactly what the left hand of darkness is. It's a really good exploration of that. All in all, I did enjoy this collection. I found that there's quite a mix of stuff in here, you know, essays on gender, essays on science fiction, essays on fantasy, essays on writing. There's a lot in here. I thought it was okay overall. For poetry, I read this one, which is Bone, and a while ago I did a video where I showed my kind of process in terms of choosing poetry books. So I was in a bookshop and I kind of took you through how I choose, and this is one of the ones that came out of it, and this is the one that I actually ended up getting. And I read it and I really, really loved it. I loved the kind of mix of shorter and longer poems. I love the kind of storytelling aspect that's embedded in some of these poems, especially the ones that are like several pages long. There's also really short poems as well, which are literally that size, which, you know, I quite like that mix. It's a lot about her family life, it's a lot about relationships, a lot about her relationship with kind of her religious background, a lot about her being a black female. There's just, you know, there's a lot in here, and I just find her family life and her you know, emotion was very raw, and I thought it was just a fantastic collection. I just hung on every word, and I want to look up and see if I can find any videos of her performing any of these, because a lot of these I think would do really well if they were performed. One of my favourite parts in this is actually quoted on the back, which is, "You will come away bruised. You will come away bruised, but this will give you poetry." And I just love that. For graphic novels, I read Sex Criminals Volume 4. Honestly, I didn't think I was ever going to read it because Volume 3 was so terrible. Volume 4 was okay. I don't necessarily have that much to say about it. I think Volume 3 disappointed me so much that I don't even like talking about that series anymore. But I also read Paper Girls Volume 1. Funny story, I picked up my copy of Paper Girls not that long ago to read. And I'd had it for ages, and then I suddenly realised that I had Volume 2 and not Volume 1, so I had to get this one. And I have to say, I am quite disappointed. I thought this was going to be amazing, and it didn't necessarily fulfil my expectations. I think the artwork and the colour palette used in this is incredible. I love, love, love the artwork. However, the story was just like lacking for me. It felt like there was no beginning and no ending. It kind of starts straight into action, which I kind of liked, but I feel like it was just so fast and there was just too much happening that I felt like I got no chance to breathe. And I loved the characters in it, but I didn't feel like I got to know them enough. You know, I was all over this because I was like, oh, an all-female led graphic novel, it looks beautiful, it's science fiction, what's not to love? But I just think that it was too fast-paced for me. I do have the second volume though, like I said, and I do think that it has potential. I didn't read it and hate it, I just don't think that it was what I wanted it to be. I think that by the second volume I could well love it, and I might retract everything that I just said, but it was okay. For fantasy, I read The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which I loved. I've been meaning to get into this series for a very long time because everyone and their granny has read and loved this series, and yes, I loved it as well. It's about this character Fitz, who is a royal bastard's son, and it's all to do with him training to become an assassin. I thought it was incredible. I think the characters were great, and I think the writing was sublime. It's very slow to get into, but I quite like that, and the writing in this is really what it's just got everything I love. It's got a fantasy world, but it's also really literary, so the description in it was great, and I just can't wait to kind of continue with the series. For science fiction, I did mention I read The Left Hand of Darkness. I've got a video in which I discuss that a lot more, so yes, that's my science fiction read so far. For general fiction, I read Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine, which is obviously everywhere at the minute. I have to say I did actually quite enjoy this one. It's not the kind of thing that I would normally pick up, but I picked it up, read it, found it very easy to get on with. It's not the kind of book that I'm used to reading. It was really nice to read something that was so simple and easy to get into. I do think that I really liked her as a character, but she's not that believable. I don't think that anyone in the world actually is like that. I think that was a very extreme version of a person. I think the reason why it's doing so well is because it's about someone who's lonely, and I think that's an experience that every human has experienced, and I think that that's where the hype is coming from. I had a customer who was talking to me, she was like, oh, that twist at the end. I have to say I didn't really feel that way. I didn't think that there was a twist. I always thought that it was kind of obvious from start to finish, but I still really enjoyed it nonetheless. For literary fiction, I read Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, which is a writer that I have been meaning to get to for a very long time. I've been told that I will love her, and I do indeed love her. I think her writing was incredible. It's one of those books in which it's like stream of consciousness, there's a lot in between the lines, fantastic characterization of a female character. I just loved it from start to finish, and I can't wait to read more from Virginia Woolf. I'm also just interested in Virginia Woolf as an individual, so I'd love to read a lot more for fiction and then maybe delve into her and her life. Speaking of which, I haven't read any memoirs or biographies. So there we go, I've identified an area that I've neglected. I don't think I've got any to read, like I don't think I own anything necessarily, but that's something, okay, note to self, Sharon. Memoirs, biographies, look at them, find something you want to read. For psychology, there's a couple of books. I read Why We Sleep, and I also read Lost Connections. Why We Sleep is a book that is like fascinating, a fascinating look into why we sleep. I had a customer who looked at it and was literally like, do you not think it's like kind of obvious? Obviously it's to get rest. And I was like, you have no idea, dude. That book quickly made me realise that I'm going to die young, I'm going to gain a ton of diseases because I don't sleep. It was a great book though, really fascinating, a real massive mix of stuff in there. It kind of looks at animals and their relationship to sleep, it looks at how detrimental the kind of school regime is to our children's health, it looks at the importance of dreaming, looks at how it impacts our physical and our mental health. It looks at a ton of stuff. It was a real mix, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, found it very accessible, and I highly recommend it. I also read Lost Connections. I listened to this in audio, which was narrated by the author themselves, which I quite liked. However, there were certain points in which I felt like he was kind of stumbling over his words a little bit, so I think that the recording could have been a little bit better. The book itself was okay. I'm not sure if it offered anything I wasn't kind of already aware of. I think that it would be more interesting to someone who doesn't know anything about the subject. It looks at antidepressants and basically how they are kind of, they don't really work. They have some form of impact. That's not me turning around and saying don't take antidepressants, they don't work. I think that they have a purpose, but they don't necessarily fix everything. And I think he's looking a lot at why we're so depressed and why depression is like kind of, it's a very, very common experience, and I feel like it's kind of increasing, and it's kind of looking at the impacts of society because of it. He talks about his own experiences a lot, so it was definitely an interesting look into depression and the issues within the pharmaceutical industry, I guess. So it was interesting, but it didn't necessarily give me, I feel like I would have liked it to be a bit more in-depth. For philosophy, I read At the Existentialist Cafe, which is another book that I listened to on audio by Sarah Bakewell. I thought it was brilliantly read. I loved it on audio, however I would rather read it in paperback because I feel like a lot of the information didn't really go into my brain. which is kind of common for me when I listen to audiobooks. It's a book that I think that is really accessible if you're a person that doesn't know a lot about philosophy, so if you're kind of interested in it, I think that is a good one to kind of start with. Likewise, I think if you're a person who knows a lot about it, it's probably still an interesting one to read. It's looking at existentialism, obviously, which is obviously a very important subject within philosophy, a very popular subject within philosophy, and it kind of looks at all of those big names like Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and that kind of thing. So it was interesting to me, but like I said, I think that I would probably get more out of it if I read it in physical form. For politics, I read Utopia for Realists, which is a book that I was quite looking forward to coming out in paperback. I found this to be really interesting. It was kind of, well, I mean, it was literally looking at Utopia for Realists. It was looking at society as it is and kind of putting forward arguments for how we can make society better. The statements within themselves, in terms of like work hours and that kind of thing, were quite bold. However, he presents his argument for how we can reach these goals of a better society, a happier society. The arguments are presented in such a way that makes it seem reasonable and achievable, and it kind of gives me hope that there is a potential for a better society at least one day. Who knows? I hope. It's a great book. It's one that I'd like to read again so that I can kind of refresh my mind on some of the arguments that were made, but it was very interesting. And it was really great to kind of see an attitude that was positive rather than negative, because I think that most of the kind of books that are coming out these days that look at the future in society are kind of more on the negative side. So it was nice to kind of get this sort of refreshing perspective. I also read Artemis Fowl, the first one. Cara at the Wild Book Garden was hosting a readathon of this. I only managed to read the first one, annoyingly, but I did really enjoy it. Do you know what? They're just good fun, and it made me feel really nostalgic because I loved these books when I was younger. It's about a 12-year-old boy who's a criminal mastermind, he's a genius, and he's a billionaire. What's not to love? Going through my Goodreads, it looks like most of the other stuff that's on here is either literary fiction, so I don't want to talk about absolutely everything. A lot of other stuff on here I've already spoke about on the channel, so I think the only other thing to mention is that I am continuing to read the Man Booker International Prize long list. I've read the White Book, so I'll do a review on that at some point. And I'm in the middle of reading Flights as well, so there'll be a video on that as well. So looking at it, I have read essays, I've read middle grade, I have read poetry, graphic novels, science fiction, fantasy, I've read literary fiction, I've read general fiction, I've read psychology books, and I've read philosophy books. Is that it? I think I've done everything. So the areas in which I haven't read much of, I haven't read any nature writing, I haven't read any history books, which is an area that I tend to neglect, but I'd like to kind of change that. Haven't read any travel writing either, but I don't read that much of that anyway. Memoir is another thing. So really those are the kind of areas in which I need to kind of focus on, I think. But really my main focus right now is still the Man Booker International Prize, so we'll see. I might do another video like this in a couple of months' time. I think it's just kind of useful for me to be able to kind of look back at some of the stuff that I've read and, like I said, to identify areas in which I'm neglecting. Anyway, this is probably super rambly, and I have mentioned already that I'm like trying to move house, so all the stress of that is kind of, it's only just in the beginning, very like initial stages. My living situation is kind of not very nice right now. Let's put it that way. So I've got to get out of here. And one of my friends has just got a job in London, so we're going to be moving in together. So she needs to get her start date for her new job. I don't know why I'm telling you my life story, but here you go. So once she gets her start date, then we can start looking for a place. Once we've done that, then we're going to find 1 or 2 other people to move in with us, and then I have to pack absolutely everything. I'm going to have to sort out a moving van, I have to get all my stuff in, blah 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 blah, and then you have to deal with all the boring shite that comes along with that. So that's my life currently. I do also have a lot of tag videos that I've like built up over months and months and months. I will get to them all. I'm just a bit slow, and please be patient with me. Also, if you're new here, thank you for watching my absolute nonsense, and if you're a regular, thank you for continuing to watch my absolute nonsense. Right, I'm going now. I'm hungry. Bye.